And we also have an opening prayer. So that's going to be up on screen. This is a centering prayer. It helps us get ready for what's to come in the next hour and a half. So please, everyone, say this prayer with me as we begin service. Oh, that's not the right prayer. Here we go. Heavenly Father, this service is about you. You are almighty, and your glory is forever. I enter your presence because of Jesus. I invite your Holy Spirit to move freely in me. Help me worship you with my whole self. Open my ears to hear your voice. Open my heart and mind to respond to you. We ask this in the wonderful name of Jesus. Amen. I also want to give a special hello and welcome and glad you're watching us, for all you who are watching us online. And we're going to have some ways that you can participate in this service also. This is a very participatory, hands-on service. And we've got some ways for you to do that as well. So stick with us. And if you've got a candle around the house, go grab that. Bring that in and light that wherever you are as a way to remember and be a part of this candlelit service we have here. And also, one last thing before we move on. Today, I want to give you permission to cry. I want to give you permission to cry. There are Kleenexes down at the ends of the aisles. A lot of you probably even received some Kleenexes as you walked in. I've got mine that's about halfway used from last night. But the reason I want to give you that permission is for some of you, crying isn't something that comes easy. In fact, if you were like me for the first 40 years of my life, I didn't really see the value of crying. But now I understand how healing crying is. And shedding tears is not a sign of weakness. It's not something to be embarrassed about. There's no need at all today to say, I'm sorry, if you're crying. Because the truth is, crying is healing. And I learned that from a little tiny book, which I've given to a lot of you. It's a little tiny book on grief. And I want to read you one page of it, because this page completely changed how I saw tears. It says this: cry. Your tears testify to your love. And tears that spring from love bring healing and renewal. Let your tears express the harsh reality of your loss, and let them begin to wash away the sadness and pain. So tears, rather than demonstrating weakness, they actually demonstrate love. And your tears testify how much you loved the person you have lost. So I give you permission to cry today. So we're going to kick things off with a video here. And it's a bit of a tradition as in our Novembering services. It's one of my favorites. It was incredibly healing and meaningful for me as I went through my largest grief stages. And it speaks to a deep truth that we all sit in the mourning booth eventually.
Can I get a cup of coffee? Yeah. How are you? Thank you. Psalm 23, David says, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." The valley. It is a depression or an extended canyon that seems to go in one direction. It seems like it would go on forever. You see, we all seem to go in these valleys in our life. We may be entering a valley, we may be in the middle of the valley, or we're about to leave the valley. And the valley, it comes in all different shapes and forms. It can be the loss of a friendship, the metaphorical death of a dream or a missed opportunity. It can even be the literal death of someone that we love. Basically, it is something that ceases to exist in our lives as we now know it. Ecclesiastes says that there is a time for everything. There is a time to laugh, and there's a time to cry. It's that mourning season. It is that season of pain. Everyone hurts at some point. We all feel the pain of experiencing the valley of the shadow of death. When we are in the midst of pain, it feels like it goes on forever. There's no relief in sight. I'm not talking about having a bad day or even a big inconvenience. I'm talking about those seasons when the pain hurts in our bones, in our gut, into the very core of who we are. So where do we go when we mourn? Where do we go with those thoughts of pain and those wounds? Jesus said, for those that are mourning, do just that, mourn. But he also gave a promise that there will be comfort. So for those people that are in the valley with no end in sight, they must be comforted. And we want to help. We want to be there for people. But in reality, there are really no words to say for someone who is sitting in their mourning booth. We try to tell jokes. We think that laughter should lighten their mood. It doesn't always seem to work. If laughter is the best medicine, why does it seem to sting when we're in the valley? And others try to offer perspective. We really don't know what to say, so we try to offer some counsel. We'll say stuff like, all things work together for good. It's true, but the timing may be a little off. Sometimes we find ourselves trying to comfort someone we really love. We say it's time to move on, to rise above it, to get over it, that there's a life still to live. But if we were to really look at them, we'd see their pain. For those of us who can't see the pain, we leave, we exit. We cannot sit in the mourning booth any longer. We cannot stay in the valley. Everyone must take their turn in the mourning booth. However, they shouldn't have to do it alone. Paul calls out the cry for the followers of Jesus. Mourn with those who mourn. Carry one another's burdens. We must get in close proximity of the person in pain. Never underestimate the power of your presence. When a person is seated in their mourning booth, there is something eternal in gently and quietly taking a seat next to the wounded. St. Francis said, share Jesus with others, and if you have to, use words. You see, you don't have to use words at all. It can make all the difference in the world when someone is willing to sit and share in the pain, the sorrow, and the hurt. It is a holy response.
Good morning. I'm Kong, the campus pastor, and if this is your first time in a Novembering, or if you've been here before for other services, today's service is a little unique. It's special. Ironically, it's one of my favorite services. It's also a very sad service. And so if you're joining us for the first time in person or online, or if you've been here before for Novembering, it's going to feel a little different. That's okay. We want to create this space for all of us to mourn, to grieve, to think about the things that we've lost, the people that we've lost. And so I invite you to sit in the tension, to sit in something that's different in the next hour here, as we just create some space for all of us to sit in the grief, the loss, whether it's our own or others. And so welcome to November. In the past 2 weeks, I've lost the most people I've known in a while. Last night I shared with the Brooklyn Park campus that I could count 4 individuals. A college friend of mine, his name was Sifik Omeng. He was the former youth pastor at St. Paul Hmong Alliance. I knew him as Roach. A couple days before he passed, his father passed, and they both passed due to COVID. Another college friend of mine, his name's Thule, he lost his father. And then a friend, his name's Nikam, lost his father as well too. This morning I thought of 2 others who had recently lost loved ones. Another college friend of mine, he lost his father-in-law to a stroke. And I think about a cousin who passed away due to COVID as well too. 6 losses in 2 weeks. That's 3 losses each week. I mourn over the loss of all these individuals. And I think we all share a similar story where we've lost many people to death this past year and a half, whether it's our friends, family members, parents, spouses, children, maybe even our pets. We might even also experience ambiguous loss, where we've missed out on things like family traditions, life experiences like birthdays, or when a new baby is born into our family, maybe graduations, big milestones that we usually celebrate, but due to the conditions of where our world's at, just haven't had time to do that, or we haven't done that for our own safety. Maybe we've lost relationships due to separation, divorce. Maybe we've lost friendships due to difference on how we view politics. Social issues have happened over the last year and a half. Maybe even our thoughts around COVID. What do we do with so much loss in this year and a half? How do we deal with all that grief and pain? And compounded on top of that are all the losses of our loved ones that we've experienced before COVID. How do we go about the holidays? How do we go about life? Knowing that our family, friends, spouse, children, parents, any of our loved ones won't be there this holiday. Sometimes it feels like we need to move on from grief and mourning. Just need to get over it. We might distract ourselves with work, hobbies, maybe some other healthy or unhealthy alternatives to medicate the loss, to heal the pain. Today at Novembering, I want to let you know it's okay for us to slow down, you and I. Slow down a little bit. And let's sit with that grief and loss. We want to create a space to say it's okay to grieve, mourn, be sad, be angry, and feel everything else that you may feel about the lost ones in your life. I don't want us to rush grief. I don't want us to rush loss like Pastor Greg had mentioned it. I hope that today we get a chance to engage it. We can engage it because God engages with it. See, Jesus preached about those who mourn and how they will receive blessing. The Psalms, all 150 chapters of them, an entire book filled with sacred songs and hymns used to worship God. About a third of those psalms are considered to be lament psalms that deal with grief, mourning, even hopelessness. So if this is your first time attending Novembering, or if you're not quite sure how you'll be in service today, it's okay. God can handle our pain. God can handle our grief. I mentioned that about a third of the Psalms talk about grief, talk about lament. And so today we're going to be in one of them. We're going to be in Psalm chapter 77 to experience how an individual dealt with grief. So let me read this for us. I cry out to God. Yes, I shout. Oh, that God would listen to me. When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long I prayed with hands lifted towards heaven, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. You don't let me sleep. I am too distressed to even pray. I think of the good old days long since ended, when my nights were filled with joyful songs. I searched my soul and pondered the difference now. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? And I said, this is my fate. The Most High has turned his hand against me. But then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. O God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. By your strong arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. When the Red Sea saw you, O God, its waters looked and trembled. The sea quaked to its very depths. The clouds poured down rain. The thunder rumbled in the sky. Your arrows of lightning flashed. Your thunder roared from the whirlwind. The lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your road led through the sea, your pathway through the mighty waters, a pathway no one knew was there. You led your people along that road like a flock of sheep, with Moses and Aaron as their shepherd. Now, it isn't clear what the writer is grieving about, but it's a big deal. The writer does not hold back on how he feels about God. In verses 1 through 9, the writer says that God doesn't listen to him. God doesn't comfort him. He can't sleep because of God. He's become an insomniac. And then specifically in verses 7 through 9, the writer asks these questions about God. I'm going to read these questions again. Has the Lord rejected me forever? Will he never again be kind to me? Is his unfailing love gone forever? Have his promises permanently failed? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he slammed the door on his compassion? The writer feels like God has completely abandoned him, and his grief has completely overtaken him. Again, these are some raw emotions that might leave us to wonder if this is okay. Can someone believe in God and say these things? Can a writer who wrote a chapter in the Psalms say these things about God? And these psalms are songs used to worship God. I think something to consider from the psalmist is this. If you do feel so hurt by God's absence, then why do you even approach God with your grief? You see, the writer knows that the only one who can heal him from his grief is no one else except God. Only God can fix this. Only God can restore this. Only God can make this right. So it's not a matter that the writer doubts God or dishonors God, but the matter is God is the only person who can make a difference. And in realizing this, the writer takes a very unusual turn in the next half of the passage. In verse 11, this is what he says. But then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. They are constantly in my thoughts. I cannot stop thinking about your mighty works. O God, your ways are holy. Is there any God as mighty as you? You are the God of great wonders. You demonstrate your awesome power among the nations. What an unusual turn after he's questioned if God's compassion is even on him. I wish I could tell you all his grief and despair and loss and mourning was taken away. But it sounds like none of it was resolved. Instead, the writer reflected on all the wonderful deeds that God had done. Some translations interpret this idea of thinking about what God has done as meditating on God's wonderful deed, the idea of meditating on it. And if we continue to read on, the writer meditates on God's deed of specifically freeing the Israelites from Egypt. For the writer, this was the greatest moment of God comforting the Israelites from their deepest grief, from the darkest moment of their despair when they were slaves in Egypt. His meditation leads him to be hopeful, even though he still experiences his grief. So if it's one thing from Psalm 77 that we need to understand about grief, it's this. Meditate on God to maintain hope while you mourn. Meditate on God to maintain hope while you mourn. Meditating on God simply means to fill our minds, you and I, our minds, with what God has done. And one of the best ways to meditate on what God has done is to engage in the Bible, in His Word, to understand who He is and what He does. So while we mourn, fill our minds with moments where God has helped others in His grief, in their grief. And while we mourn, fill our minds with moments where God has helped us with our grief. This helps us maintain hope in the truth that God will help us with our grief. And this can all be done while we mourn. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both. You might have lost friends, family members, maybe a spouse, parents, a child, grandparents, maybe even a pet. You might feel unsettled in the situation you're in, and you may not get any answers, any immediate answers for the grief and loss that you experience. But as we mourn and grieve, we can meditate on God by filling our minds on what God has done. Meditate on God because it reminds you that God has comforted others' griefs, and He will comfort your grief. Again, the writer turned back to Egypt when the Israelites were slaves to find hope that if God did that, God could heal my grief too. You and I, we can meditate back to Jesus because that's the greatest thing that we've experienced or that we know about, to see what He has done. And then we can also meditate back to what Jesus said to understand what He will do with our grief. So not only can we look back to see what Jesus has done, but we can look back to see what Jesus will do. This helps maintain our hope in Jesus. So church, mourn and grieve. And meditate on Jesus while you're at it. Because we know that only Jesus can make it right.
For our spiritual exercises today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take a break from our normal exercises, and here we're going to do 2 of them. We're still going to do some silence. We're going to do that in a sec. But first, we're going to practice the exercise of corporate reading of Scripture. And in fact, we're going to read one of the lament psalms. So we're going to have Psalm 6 up on the screen. And I'd like all of us to read it out loud. And this is another lament psalm and if you've never read these, if you aren't familiar with this style of psalm, some of the words and language might feel a little uncomfortable. You might even want to, can I really say this? Well, the answer is yes. It's in the Bible God gave us. So let's read Psalm 6 together as an act of corporate lament. So please join me. O Lord, don't rebuke me in your anger or discipline me in your rage. Have compassion on me, Lord, for I am weak. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. I am sick at heart. How long, O Lord, until you restore me? Return, O Lord, and rescue me. Save me because of your unfailing love. For the dead do not remember you. Who can praise you from the grave? I am worn out from sobbing. All night I flood my bed with weeping, drenching it with my tears. My vision is blurred by grief. My eyes are worn out because of all my enemies. Go away, all you who do evil, for the Lord has heard my weeping. The Lord has heard my plea. The Lord will answer my prayer. May all my enemies be disgraced and terrified. May they suddenly turn back in shame. I picked this psalm particularly for the line, I am worn out from sobbing. All night I flood my bed with weeping, drenching it with my tears. And my bet is that over the last year and a half, all of us have probably had a time where we were tired from weeping or tired from sorrow. We were just exhausted of it all. And so I love the reaffirmation of God's character and his faithfulness in this, even amidst our weeping. Well, next up, we're going to spend some time and be still with God. We call it our exercise of stillness and silence. But today we're going to do it for 2 minutes. We normally only do it for 1. Because I want to give you an extended time to sit with God. You don't have to pray. Of course you can. And if you find your mind wandering, bring it back. Help center it back onto God. And here's how you're going to do that. So I want you to think of one thing God has done in your life. Remember the psalm that Pastor Kong read was, remember what the Lord has done. So I want you to think of one thing, just one. Everybody right now, think of one thing God has done in your life. Okay? Do you have it? You online as well? Think of one thing. And then if your mind wanders, I want you to remember that one thing, to center yourself back to God. So I've got a timer on my watch for 2 minutes. So please join me and be with God now. Amen.
Now, many of us thought that 2020 was rough, and we were looking forward to 2021, and the roughness still continued. And we're coming to the end of 2021. Who knows what 2022 will look like? So there's this idea that when we mourn, we know that it's for a time, and that things are going to look better, and this too shall pass. But what if it keeps going? What if the grief continues? What if we can't actually see the light at the end of the tunnel? Then what do we do? In the mental health field, there's this concept called complicated grief. And complicated grief is living in an ongoing, heightened state of mourning that keeps you from actually healing. And it just keeps going. So the duration feels like there's no end. The intensity feels like the emotions are so painful that you don't know what to do with them. And the result is that you end up feeling hopeless, helpless, purposeless. And when this happens, there are options that you have. You can either camp out and live in the mourning booth, like we saw earlier in that video, or you can actually get help. There is help. There are things we can do. And I foresee that in 2022, many of us are going to feel like, okay, this has gone too long. I can't stay in this state of, I don't know what's going to happen. Too much grief. We will lose more people. And what do we do with that? So here are some things that I would bring to our attention. First is, yes, respect that loss. Grieve well. Go through that process. And while you're doing it, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself physically, because oftentimes part of what happens in complicated grief is that we just let go of self-care. Another thing to do is to reach out. When we're grieving and mourning, we tend to want to isolate. We don't like the fact that other people are moving on with life and they're actually enjoying life, and they don't understand our pain, so we tend to isolate ourselves. But one of the steps toward healing is to reach out socially, emotionally, spiritually, and even reaching out for professional help if that's needed. Another thing to do is to take baby steps. Part of complicated grief is that you no longer find purpose in life and you no longer want to do the things that are needed for daily living. But part of growth is just taking those little steps. Maybe get up and cook if you enjoyed cooking. Maybe volunteer to do something. But take baby steps. And finally, remember. Pastor Kong read Psalm 77, where the psalmist says, "Then I recall, then I recall." I once heard somebody say that when you are in the dark, remember what you learned in the light. So remember. And I want to close with Psalm 63, verse 6 through 8, where the psalmist again remembers. It says, if I'm sleepless at midnight, I spend the hours in grateful reflection because you've always stood up for me. I am free to run and play. I hold on to you for dear life, and you hold me steady as a post.
Sometimes death and loss can feel bittersweet. At least for me, it feels bittersweet. It's bitter because we lost our loved ones. And it's sweet in the sense that we get to remember and think about all the great times and all the great value that has been added to our lives from the one that we've lost. I'm going to read a piece called The Blessing Hidden in Grief by Henry Nouwen. This paints a picture for us how there can be blessings hidden in our grief. What to do with our losses? We must mourn our losses. We cannot talk or act them away, but we can shed tears over them and allow ourselves to grieve deeply. To grieve is to allow our losses to tear apart feelings of security and safety and lead us to the painful truth of our brokenness. Our grief makes us experience the abyss of our own life in which nothing is settled, clear, or obvious, but everything is constantly shifting and changing. But in the midst of all this pain, there is a strange, shocking, yet very surprising voice. It is the voice of the one who says, "Blessed are those who mourn. They shall be comforted." That's the unexpected news. There is a blessing hidden in our grief. Not those who comfort are blessed, but those who mourn. Somehow, in the midst of our tears, a gift is hidden. Somehow, in the midst of our mourning, the first steps of the dance takes place. Somehow, the cries that well up from our losses belong to our songs of gratitude.
Well, now we're going to move into one of the best parts of the Novembering service, and that's our time of sharing and candle lighting. So during this time, we're going to have a mic set up downstairs, right down there, and in a moment we'll do that. And you've probably seen we also have some votive candles over here. And this is a time we invite you to either come up to share. You can share the name and just a little bit about the loved one you've lost. Please keep it short. We want to make sure we have enough time for everybody who wants to share. Or you could come up to light a candle. We have some lighters up front, and we also have some Clorox wipes if you want to wipe down the lighter before you use it. And the lighters are easy. There's a button on the top that you press forward and then click the trigger. And we can help you out if you have some trouble with that. But I encourage you to share, because there's something healing about sharing not just the name, but who that person was to you. And we will go as long as you all want to share. So if you give us a moment, we're going to readjust the camera so all of you online can participate as well. And also, for all of you who are watching us, if you want to share as well, post into the comments. I'll be monitoring those on my tablet, and I'll jump in and share whatever you've written. And we will even light a candle on behalf of you. Just write in the comment, light a candle for blank. Or you could just say, light me a candle. And we'll do that on behalf of you, so you can participate with your RiverLife family. So give us a second as we adjust the camera and get the mic set up here. And so, yeah, so if you'd like to light a candle, you can swing to that side of the camera. If you'd like to share, you can come up here. There we go. How's that look online, folks? Looks good? All right. Well, I'll start. So for Novembering, I light a candle for 3 people. I've shared about my mom, and so I always light a candle for her. And then I also light a candle for my grandma and grandpa. I wrote a story. We launched a new blog, and I've been writing a lot about grief this year. And I wrote a little bit about an experience before I had with my grandpa that was one of the momentous moments to help me understand grief. But they died a long time ago. That was 20 plus years. But as a child, I absolutely loved going to visit them. We swam and played golf, or swung a golf club and sent balls into the woods. I fished for the first time with them, and we always fed the ducks. But I had a wonderful childhood with them. And with my mom, I always think that the thing I miss most about her was she was sort of the heart of the family. My dad has always been the brains of the family. And my sister and I inherited some of that also. But my mom was the heart. And I miss that. Our trips out to California over Christmas or summer just aren't quite the same. And there are times I poignantly feel that longing for my mom's heart. Thankfully, I married someone who can bring a little bit of heart into the Rhodes family. And so I light 3 candles in November.
It'll be 7 years tomorrow since my husband went home to be with the Lord. He had stage 4 cancer and he died of complications of pneumonia. That's what took him home. He was only on hospice for 12 hours, and they called me about 1:45 in the morning and told me he was gone. Like Pastor, I did not grieve. It was right before the holidays. It was right before my birthday. I threw myself into writing thank you notes and getting Thanksgiving ready for the family and Christmas Eve for the family. And then I went back to work in January. And it wasn't until about February or March it really hurt me, and it hit me rather, and I found myself going to bed in the middle of the day and just wishing that I had gone also. I was very mad at John. I was angry that he left me here behind. And we were married for 40 years, so it was quite a loss for me. And tomorrow my daughter and I will be doing a little bit of celebration to remember him.
there's another person that my family has lost, and my sister reminded me of this in the comments. She's watching out in California, and so we light a candle for our stepfather. He gave our mom a wonderful life in the second half of her life. So we light a candle for Bob.
I want to light 2 candles this morning. One for my mom, who passed away when I was 21. She also had stage 4 colon cancer, and so I came home from college to take care of her before she passed away. And so I always think of what a crazy life she lived. Coming here from the motherland, she had a handicap, and so I think of how crazy that must have been to flee, to run through the jungle, to cross the river, to live in a camp for a while. And she raised me as a single mom, did everything for me, and then she passed right as I was about to graduate college, and so I want to honor her. I want to light another candle for my wife's cousin's son, who just passed about a month ago. He was like 4 years old. He had a rare condition, or a rare case of leukemia. And as a new dad, I don't think anyone should have to bury a child that young. And so I want to remember him as well.
We have another request from online to light. We're going to light 3 candles, and this is from Hills, if you know her, for her dad, her grandpa, and her nephew. So Hills, this is for you.
I want to light a candle for my mom. I've lost her when I was in the 1st grade due to a car accident. And so I had to grow up very quickly, and kind of like what Pastor Greg had experienced. I really never grieved for her. So that's the candle I want to light up for her.
Today, I'm going to be lighting 3 candles. One for my grandma, because she passed away 2.5 years ago, and we miss her so much. She was such a great person. She had amazing cooking. It was just amazing. We are going to do one for my aunt, Tracy. She passed away 25 years ago yesterday, so we're gonna do one for her. And I never got to meet her, but everyone tells me wonderful stories about her and how amazing she was. And we're going to light one for my grandpa because he passed away. It's been a while, maybe when I was in first grade or kindergarten. But we are gonna light one for him too.
Today I want to light a candle for my father's mom and dad. My grandma died a few years ago, and my grandpa died when my dad was a baby. I think for most of my life, I never knew my grandparents. And even when my grandma died, I found it hard to mourn because I felt like I never knew her. And in some ways, I felt like I didn't have a reason to mourn because I didn't lose someone significant in my life. But I think growing up in the Hmong family or Hmong culture, I think it's special to have your grandparents from your dad's side because I always thought that if I had my grandparents, then they would be my grandparents. And there's a little bit of a disconnect having your grandparents from your mom's side. And I've always wondered what it would be like if my grandma was here to what would it be like for them to give me money because they just loved me? What would it be like for me to go home with some chicken because they didn't want me to starve? I didn't have a grandpa there to teach me how to fish or to make little small crafts for me or to hold me as a kid. Today I light a candle for both of my grandparents who I never knew. And when they died, I also lost the opportunity to experience those small little things.
So I'll be lighting 2 candles today. One is for my grandpa who passed away a year ago last month and was a great man, a huge hand in raising me and showing me how a man should love his family and provide and lead his family. The second is a little harder for me. It's going to be for the loss of my marriage. Last Thursday was supposed to be my 3-year anniversary, but instead I used it as a time to mourn and grieve the loss of something that I don't quite know how to quantify. It's not the loss of a life, but it's a loss of a relationship that meant something tremendous to me. So I'll be lighting a candle for that lost relationship.
I also forgot to mention that you don't have to share. If you would simply like to light a candle, that's okay as well. You can come up at any point to do that.
I'm going to light 2 candles. One's going to be for my father, who lived a long life. Good memories. They actually called him the godfather of Payne Avenue. So that's a good memory. But then my brother's a little harder. He died unexpectedly. It was both within 3 months, about 6 years ago. And there'll still be times I'm driving down the road and I think of my brother and I'll start weeping, you know. So I guess I'm not totally over that. It was unexpected where my father really wasn't. I'm going to light a candle for John, for Maggie.
I'm going to be lighting one candle for La. She was more than a dog to me. It was just her and me, and I could almost hear her speak to me. And she followed me everywhere, including the bathroom, and would be underfoot when I cooked, and barked at the vacuum. And she was funny. She made me laugh, and I miss her terribly. And for the first time in a very long time, I cried when she passed. She had liver disease, and she went down pretty quick. So I want to light a candle for her.
I'm going to light 4 candles. One is going to be for my friend Ili. One is going to be for my mentor Dan. One is going to be for my friend's brother Fuchi. And one is going to be for all the youth in our community that we have lost due to suicide.
So we have another request from our online church here. It's from my sister-in-law's song. She's asking to light 2 candles. Song, these are for you. First for our Uncle Sue Tao, who was my mother-in-law's younger brother. And if you ever watched a video from ST Universal, that's Uncle Sue. And then second, one for my mother-in-law's oldest sister, whose song says, who was always proud of me. So they both passed away this past year.
I'm going to light 3 candles for 3 people who never existed. But when Greg and I first got married, I had my kids picked out their names, their birth order, had dreams about what they would do and be like. So for any of you who are longing for children and are grieving that, I light a candle for that as well. But these were the 3 names I had chosen: Nathaniel Barrett, Alexia Rain, and Ari Caleb.
About 3 years ago on New Year's Eve, my wife's youngest sister, Gajol, had triplets. They were 12 weeks old, and due to complications, she had to give birth to all three of them. And they were with us for a couple hours. We got a chance to hold all three of them in her hospital room. And so they would be about 3 years old today, and my nephews and nieces are very dear to me, and so I wish I had more time with them, all three of them. Their names are Leo, Lyric, and Luna.
We have another request from online. This is from Sai, who's watching at home right now. And, his nephew, Savan, died a few years ago. It was about 4 years ago or so. And I did their funeral for the family. I did. And so we're lighting a candle. And Sai says, so it was an unexpected passing. When my nephew was a baby and a child, we called him Tiger. So Sai, here's one for Savan, or Tiger. And I've never lit a candle for him. So out of college, my first real job was a high school teacher and swim coach. I coached swimming and water polo, and one of the guys that I coached as a freshman was named Brian. And as his senior year, he died of cardiac arrest while in the pool. I wasn't at practice that day. He was with the varsity water polo team, and so I wasn't coaching him at the time. And probably my greatest regret in grief is that I didn't attend his funeral. And at that time, I didn't know what to do with grief. I didn't see a point to it. I didn't want to subject myself. And I prided myself on being stoic and strong. And I think about him sometimes. And particularly this week as I've been writing about grief and thinking about this service. I wish I had gone. So, Brian, this one's for you, and I'm sorry.
This one comes from our online congregation, so this one's for you, Melody. My family and I would like to light one for a family friend who died a few weeks ago to suicide, Brian. It was very sudden to us, and we wish we knew him more. Please pray for his 2 children who are mourning the death of their father. So Melody and your family, this one's for Brian.
Today I'm going to light one candle for my grandma. This is the first holiday season without her.
I'd like to light 3 candles, and one is for the friendships that I've lost during COVID. I learned from that loss that there was a lot of self-growth that needed to happen. Another one is for my stepdad who was murdered. My mom and him were only married for about 6 months, and I just often think about all the great things that we could have done as a family, and even though he was only with us for a short while, he gave us a lot of happiness, and for a moment we felt like we had a father figure in our family, so I miss him dearly. And the last one is for my mother-in-law. I didn't realize that her death would forever change the trajectory of my life spiritually, and there were many things that I'm still learning today about myself, and her lessons that continue to help me in my marriage and my life. So even though we didn't have a good relationship, because we didn't know how to love one another, her lessons, the good things, they stick with me. So I light a candle for her as well.
All right, I'll light 3 candles. One for my father, who was murdered when I was an infant. One for his first wife, who shown my wife and I a lot of compassion when we went and visit them for the first time. And the last one for my eldest sister, who took her own life when she was 12 years old.
I'd like to invite the worship team up, and we're going to close with 2 songs. And there's a reason that we're putting the worship at the end of the service, because it mirrors what a lot of the lament psalms did. In almost all of the lament psalms, they ended with affirmations of God's goodness. And that's what we're doing today. And that's what I love about the lament psalms is they were raw and emotional and powerful. But no matter how hard those words were and how painful the moments and the experiences were, that these psalms ended in worship. And so go ahead and stand, and we're going to model after those authors. And we're going to end our time of grief by remembering God's goodness, remembering his faithfulness, and worshiping him. During this time, if you'd still like to light a candle, you are welcome at any time during these two songs to come up and light a candle or even more candles.
You may all be seated.
Well, at the beginning of service, I referred to a book, and I read a little piece about crying and tears, and it was this little tiny book called Grief Therapy. It's from a series called Elf Help. It's tiny, and it's really cute, and it was the best thing I read on grief out of anything. And so we actually have some copies of these. I give these out to almost every funeral that I preside over and to families that have lost, and many of you probably even have one of these that I've given you. But if you're dealing with some fresh grief, you've lost someone this year and the pain is hard and you're not sure what to do with your grief, I would love to give you a copy of this. We've got a little handful, and if I run out, I'll order more. So if you'd like a copy of Elf Help, Grief Therapy, just come see me up front after service. I'd love to give you one. It was immensely helpful for me to learn about grief, and I'd love to share it with you.
And then today for offering, we won't be passing the baskets, but if you do have your offering, feel free to drop them off at one of the 3 boxes in the back, or you can give online at riverlifemn.com/give. Church family, whether online or in person, came here maybe not knowing what Novembering was, or maybe you knew what Novembering was, and we might have opened up a wound of the loss that you experience. And so even though we are concluding service, I don't want to rush you out of here. If you need prayer, Pastor Greg and I, along with Paying Full, we're here. We're going to stay behind, and we would love to pray for you if you need some prayer. If you need some time just to sit in your seat and gaze at the candles and think about your loved ones, we invite you to do so. And so don't rush this precious moment to be able to sit with your pain and your grief and to sit with God. And so again, we invite you to spend as much time as you need in the sanctuary for healing, for comfort, to continue to mourn, to continue to feel your loss, but know that you're not alone. We're here and God's here. I invite you to hug somebody, to receive a hug, maybe send a text message, give a call to those who you care for, or those who maybe share the loss with you, knowing that you are not alone. And as we conclude service, we end with this benediction every week. But I pray that today, this benediction will touch you in different ways. The very ending line of the benediction talks about God's peace upon you. And this peace is complete peace that makes everything right. And you may or may not feel all of it today, but I know that when Jesus Christ comes back, we will feel the completeness of the peace that he's promised us. And so RiverLife family, online and in person, I invite you to open up your hands. And I'll say this blessing over you. It is not my blessing, but it's God's blessing over all of you. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord smile on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you his peace. Thanks for being with us. Again, take some time, whatever time you need, to continue to soak in whatever it is that you want to soak in. But thanks for being here. We love you all. And may God's peace be upon you in the next couple minutes, days, weeks, and months to come. God's blessing to you all.